I realized after listening to my last podcast that that was actually episode 10. I meant to talk about why I called this podcast what I called it in episode 10. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Why did I call this podcast Almost Professional? Hey guys, this is Blake Calhoun, and this is another episode of Almost Professional, the podcast about mobile filmmaking, DIY filmmaking, and pretty much everything filmmaking. And when I started this podcast, I had a tough time coming up with a name, but then it came to me. I will take a phrase from my filmmaking endeavors that I do routinely, and it's an inside joke phrase, and I'll apply it to this podcast. And because of mobile filmmaking and indie filmmaking and DIY filmmaking, I just felt like the name fit perfectly. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by almost professional? Well, it actually goes back several years and to short films I have done in the past, even feature films. So you're in a screening showing your friends or family your movie. When I say screening, I usually mean on a DVD. Now remember, this was several years ago, on a DVD in your living room. And after the movie plays, again, whether it's a short film or I've done feature films, I think in this case it was actually a short film, at least the first time someone said this to me. And by the way, when they say this, they mean this as a complete compliment. They don't mean this derogatory at all. So I show a short film, and at the end, everyone says, "Yeah, that was great. I really like it." And then someone inevitably would say, "That looks almost like a real movie." Yep. They would say that looks almost like a real movie. Now, what they meant by that, especially again, before we had all these formats today where you can make everything look very cinematic and very high-end, so to speak. I think back then I was shooting on a Panasonic DVX 100. And so what they meant was you shot 24p, is usually what they meant. Or that you frame things and move the camera like a Hollywood movie. It also happened to a couple of my filmmaker friends, which we all thought this was just really funny. I mean, I've made my living as a professional filmmaker since I was out of college. And when I say professional, I mean someone being paid to make films. That doesn't necessarily mean they're high quality films, especially when you're starting out. But if you're paid to do what you do, then I would call yourself a professional. And so it became sort of a running joke between me and several of my filmmaking buddies. So over the years, when we were on a shoot or something, we would be lighting and setting up a shot. And once everything was ready, we would look at the monitor, and inevitably someone would say, "This looks almost professional." And we would have a good chuckle. So cut to anything to do with low-budget filmmaking, indie filmmaking, DIY filmmaking, mobile filmmaking, and you're using tools that are really more prosumer, in some respects consumer, not necessarily pro-level tools, although the lines have clearly blurred over the years. As I routinely say, it really doesn't matter what camera you use, depending on the job, of course. Just use the right tool for the job, but no matter what, you'll routinely have people question whether the tools you're using are professional enough for what you're doing. Now, this is really probably geared more towards indie filmmaking more than anything else. If you're doing client work, more often than not, you'll have a budget to do the tools that you want to use, again, whatever that may be. But if you're doing a short film or an indie film, I think a lot of people fall into this. They might get embarrassed with the setup they have, thinking that just because they're shooting on a smartphone or a mirrorless camera, a DSLR, what have you, that you feel inferior. You feel like your project doesn't stand up. And that couldn't be further from the truth. There are countless examples. That goes back even to shooting like 16 millimeter for feature films. Shooting video for feature films initially was really very taboo. And it wasn't too long ago where Sundance and the big festivals wouldn't even project video. I've always been someone who pushes boundaries with technology in particular. Never really wanted anyone to tell me that you couldn't do something. And so if you follow me, you know I've used mini DV, I've used HDV, I've shot film, I, of course, shoot on smartphones and mobile filmmaking. And over the years, you'll have people tell you that you can't shoot green screen unless you have a 10-bit 422 camera. Now, this is tech talk, but most cameras we shoot with today are 420. And when I say most cameras, I mean most affordable cameras. Mirrorless cameras, all the Sonys, the Canons. Now, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, 8-bit video, 420 video is everywhere, and you can absolutely shoot green screen with it. But people will tell you routinely you can't do it. I've shot green screen with my smartphone. It's no problem at all. Partly because technology on the post side has gotten so good. You can pull good keys, as long as everything's lit pretty well too. And then you'll routinely hear people say, and I had this comment the other day on YouTube, this is regarding shooting log footage with Filmic Pro. You should never shoot log with an 8-bit format. You should only shoot log in 10-bit. That is false. Is 10-bit ideal? Yeah, of course it is. But it's not something to lose sleep over, and it's absolutely not something to keep you from shooting log. And that means, again, with mirrorless cameras, Sony cameras are all 8-bit. Most every DSLR is 8-bit. And of course, smartphones are 8-bit. I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but shooting log is not only about getting more dynamic range. For me, it's also, it just instantly gives the footage a more cinematic look. It takes that electronic edge off there. So the overall point here is, though, working in indie film, working in mobile filmmaking, all the tools you use are, in quotes, almost professional. And that even applies to this podcast. A lot of people will tell you you need a really fancy microphone and a mixer and fancy audio recording software. But of course you don't. For this podcast, I primarily use 2 different USB mics, depending on whether I'm recording at my house or whether I'm recording at my office. One of them is a Sennheiser and one of them is a Yeti mic. This is the Yeti mic I'm using right now. And I just record it into my phone using the Meta Recorder app. That's it. And the app I use for my podcasting is Anchor, the Anchor app. It's very simple. It's very, what I would call, indie friendly. Well, number one, it's free. And then they distribute your podcast out to the world, including on Apple and Spotify, etc. And so when I use the phrase almost professional, though, I'm using it in a sarcastic tone because it's you, it's the person, it's the filmmaker that matters. It's not the gear you use. The gear today is all so good that it doesn't really matter. I mean, again, unless you're talking really high end, the difference between everything is getting so minimal that it really just depends on what you prefer. And so saying almost professional is a tongue-in-cheek way of reinforcing the fact that you can use whatever tool, whatever you want to do, as long as you are making a professional product. As long as you are making good content, it doesn't matter what you use. So the tools don't matter. It's what you do with the tools that matters. And if anyone ever tells you that your work looks almost professional or that looks almost like a real movie, take that as a compliment. That means it does look like a real movie. That means it does look professional. And so if you're doing your work for free, then next time you should probably charge for it. Just a little housekeeping note here. I am working on some interviews that I'm going to include in the future on this podcast. Some people I think you'll be interested in hearing from, so that'll probably come later this year and maybe into the new year. I'm not sure. Right now it's Thanksgiving week 2019. Also, just a quick note to say that all the courses I have, my mobile filmmaking courses, they're all on sale this week through Cyber Monday, 25% off. It's a Black Friday sale that is before Black Friday, but not quite to Black Friday and not quite to Cyber Monday and not going through Cyber Monday. So yeah, it seems like everybody's doing their Black Friday sales early this year. So I'm doing one too. And if you've been considering one of my courses, right now would be a good time to check it out. Again, 25% off on all the courses. And right now I have 3. Smartphone Cinematography 101, The Complete Guide to Filmic Pro, and Make a Movie Today. Make a Movie Today is more of a behind the scenes rather than a course. It's a filmmaker commentary on the 20 short films I made in 20 days. I did that back in 2018. Lastly, I am working on some more courses for those that are interested. These have been pretty popular and they're a great way to share my experience and my knowledge and help people learn. And it's a good way to support what I do and a good way to keep my YouTube channel, my website, and this podcast going. This is Blake Calhoun, and this has been another episode of Almost Professional. Now you know why I call it that. So I do appreciate you listening, and I will look forward to talking to you in the next episode.